Hold up, you're still here. I know, because you feel it too, that this story isn't finished yet, that something's missing, that something is waiting. Last time I told you two things. First, Maromro had lost a musician in his life, and that loss was the beginning of everything. Second, that night in the bar, as Bob was getting up to leave, Maromro leaned in and whispered two words. Just two words. And I didn't tell you what they were. I'm still not telling you today. But today, I'm going to tell you why those two words matter so much. Because those two words, they were the essence of one man's entire life. Two words that held years of pain, hope, and a promise he made to himself. And to understand those two words, you need to know Maromro's story, his real story. My name is Scar, and this is that story. Take a deep breath, because we're going way back now. Port of Spain, Trinidad. The island's capital was overflowing with music back then. Calypso poured through the streets, steel drum sounds rose up from the harbors, and right in the middle of all that music, in a small wooden house, a child was born. His mother named him Maromro, a strange name. Nobody really knew what it meant. His mother never explained it. She'd just laugh when people asked. This name came to him, she'd say. I didn't choose it. Maromro grew up on the streets of Port of Spain, a poor but lively neighborhood. His father worked at the docks. His mother was a seamstress. Money was always tight, but music was always free. And Maromro, from a very young age, looked at music differently. When other kids heard music, they'd dance. Maromro would stop. He'd close his eyes, and he'd listen, not just to the sound, but to what was behind it. There's something inside music, he'd tell his mother, something words can't say. His mother would nod slowly. I know, baby. I know. Maromro was 17 years old, and that year, he met the most important person in his life. The man's name was Elias. Elias was the best calypso guitarist in Port of Spain. 30 years old, powerful, magnetic. His voice could fill a room. His guitar talked, literally. Even in the spaces between the notes, something was being said. Maromro heard him for the first time in a small public square. The crowd was dancing, everyone was moving, but Maromro stopped, right in the middle of the crowd, and he watched Elias. Elias noticed him too. After the show, he walked over. You didn't dance, he said. No, said Maromro. Why not? Because I was listening. Elias smiled. He looked at Maromro for a long moment. What did you hear? Maromro thought about it. You were trying to say something, he finally said. But words weren't enough, so you left it to the guitar. Elias's eyes filled. A 17-year-old kid, he whispered. And you heard that. From that day forward, Maromro and Elias were inseparable. For 5 years, Maromro learned everything from Elias. Not just music. He learned what music was. Music isn't a tool, Elias would say. Music is a door. For some people, that door never opens. But there are certain people. It's like that door was made just for them. And your job is to find those people, to bring them to that door. How do we know them? Maromro asked one day. Elias thought about it. Their eyes, he said. People who truly hear music, their eyes are different. They look like they're staring far away, but really, they're looking inward. Maromro never forgot those words. Maromro was 22 years old, and that year, everything changed. Elias got sick. At first, it seemed like nothing. A cough. Fatigue. It'll pass, Elias kept saying. Everything passes. But it didn't pass. Within months, Elias grew weak. He couldn't hold his guitar anymore. His fingers trembled. His breath kept cutting short. Maromro was by his side every single day. Every day he read to him. Every day he played music for him. Every day he held his hand. And one morning, just as the sun was rising, Elias opened his eyes. He looked at Maromro. "I need to tell you something," he said. Maromro leaned in close. "I'm listening." Elias spoke slowly. His voice was breaking, but his eyes were clear. "All over this world, there are people. Their music is locked inside them. Nobody has heard it. Nobody has opened that door." Maromro waited. "You can open that door. You'll do what I couldn't." "How?" Maromro asked. His voice was trembling. Elias smiled. "One last time. You'll find a way. You already know how. Look at the eyes, the ones that look far away but are really looking inward." And Elias's eyes closed. Maromro didn't cry that day. He couldn't. He just sat there, next to Elias, for hours. And then, at midnight, he stood up. He walked outside, walked to the ocean, put his feet in the water, and he whispered. Not to anyone, just to the night, just to the sea. "I'll find them, I promise." After that promise, Maromro couldn't stay in Port of Spain. Everything reminded him of Elias. A year later, he left Trinidad, and the search began. Scar steps in. "Now let me tell you about those years for Maromro, from 1958 to 1963. 5 years. For 5 years, Maromro traveled, from Trinidad to Barbados, from Barbados to London, from London back to the Caribbean. Everywhere he went, he watched musicians. He listened. He searched. What was he looking for? What Elias had described. Eyes that looked far away but were really looking inward. He saw dozens of musicians, watched hundreds of shows. Some were good, some were very good, but in none of them could he see it. Those eyes. Not until 1963. Not until Kingston. How did Maromro end up in Kingston? Not by accident, we know that well by now, but why Kingston specifically? Because he'd heard a rumor. There was a young man in Trenchtown. He worked at a factory during the day. At night, he wrote songs. He knocked on record label doors, got turned away over and over again, but he didn't quit. There was something strange about the rumor. People who'd heard this young man felt something they couldn't explain. Something in his voice, still raw, still unpolished, but there was something there. When Maromro heard this rumor, he felt something familiar, and he came to Kingston. But before Maromro, we need to go back to Mr. G, because Mr. G hadn't been sitting still. That note hadn't worked. Bob had been rejected, yes, but he hadn't quit. He kept coming back. He kept going to the beach. He kept playing. He was growing. Mr. G could see this, and he'd made a new plan. This time it wasn't a note. This time he was going to hit deeper. He was going to reach the people closest to Bob. His family, his neighborhood, the people of Trenchtown. He was going to start a whisper campaign. That kid will never make it. Don't waste your time on him. The labels don't want him. Small whispers, but enough of them sustained long enough. They could break even the strongest person. Mr. G knew this. Bob noticed people were looking at him differently. Neighbors would stop talking when he walked up. Old friends were pulling away. Nobody said anything directly, just looks, silences, half-finished sentences. Bob couldn't understand it. He kept going to the beach, kept playing. But even those beach mornings felt different now. Something was stuck inside him. That old flow wasn't coming through anymore. One evening, walking home, an older man called out to him, a familiar face from the neighborhood. "Bob," he said quietly. Bob stopped. The man looked around. Nobody was there. "Be careful," he whispered. "Somebody wants to finish you. I don't know who, but the whispers are coming from everywhere." Bob froze. "Who?" he asked. The man shook his head. "I don't know, but somebody powerful. Very powerful." And he walked away. And then, that very night, Bob was walking on a dark street when he saw someone. He recognized him immediately. That calm posture, those eyes, that timeless face. Maromro. Bob froze. His footsteps stopped. Maromro was walking straight toward him, like he knew he'd be there. He stopped right in front of him. "It's been a while," Maromro said. Bob couldn't speak. "I know what's happening," Maromro said. "You're hearing the whispers." Bob swallowed hard. "Who?" he asked. His voice was shaking. Maromro looked at him for a long moment. "The answer to that question won't make you stronger right now," he said. "But the answer to a different question will." "Which question?" Maromro slowly turned, started walking. "Come," he said. Just that. This time it wasn't a bar. They went to the beach. Midnight. The moon had just risen. Waves were gently hitting the shore. Kingston's lights flickered in the distance. The two of them sat down in the sand. Maromro started talking. This time it was different. Not like that bar night. That night he'd asked Bob questions, made him find his own answers. Tonight, Maromro told his own story. He talked about Elias. He talked about Trinidad. He talked about the promise. He talked about 5 years of searching. Bob listened in silence, didn't ask a single question. When Maromro finished, a long silence fell. Only the waves were talking. Then Bob asked, "Why are you telling me all this?" Maromro picked up a handful of sand, let it go, watched it fall. "Because," he said, "you are the person Elias was talking about." Bob went still. "What do you mean?" "Before he died, Elias told me. One day I'll find someone," he said. "Someone with eyes that look far away but are really looking inward." Silence. "And you," Maromro said, "have exactly those eyes." Bob didn't speak for a long time. Maromro didn't wait for an answer. They just sat there, together, looking at the ocean. Then Bob asked, "That night in the bar, you whispered something to me. 2 words." Maromro turned his head. "I remember," he said. "What were those 2 words?" Maromro smiled, that familiar, slow, deep smile. "You know," he said. Bob paused. "Me?" "When you heard those 2 words, something inside you recognized them, didn't it? Right in that moment." Bob thought about it. And yes, that moment in the bar, as he was getting up from the table, when he heard Maromro's whisper, something had happened inside him, something he couldn't describe but could feel. "Yes," he said slowly. "That feeling," Maromro said, "was already the answer to those 2 words." Bob looked at him. "But I want to know." "You know," Maromro said again, "you just haven't accepted it yet." But Mr. G wasn't sitting still. That night, at those exact same hours, something else was happening in Kingston. Mr. G's people were in Trenchtown. This time, it wasn't whispers. This time, they'd gone to one of Bob's closest friends. They'd offered him money. Big money. And in return, they wanted just one thing: to get Bob out of Trenchtown. "Tell him to go to London," they'd said. "Tell him there's no future for him here. Tell him to leave and never come back." That friend, I won't give his name, this isn't his story. That friend didn't take the money. But the next morning, he came to Bob and told him everything. When Bob heard all of it, he stayed silent for a long time. His friend waited. Bob was looking out the window, at Kingston's rooftops. The morning sun shimmered on the tin rooftops. "Thank you," he finally said. His voice was calm. "What are you gonna do?" his friend asked. Bob turned around, and he smiled. For the first time in a long time, he really smiled. "I'm gonna play," he said. "That's it? That's it." After that day, something changed. Bob played differently now. Not just for himself anymore. He was playing for Elias too now. He knew about Maromro's promise, and he felt like he was part of that promise. The notes came differently. The words flowed easier, and that stuck feeling inside him, it was slowly dissolving. Maromro was sometimes at the beach, sometimes he wasn't, but it didn't matter anymore, because Maromro's words were always there, and Elias's promise was always there. Part 16. Mr. G in the Shadows. But Mr. G was still there, still watching, and what he was seeing was making him uncomfortable. Bob hadn't broken. If anything, he was getting stronger. Mr. G couldn't understand this. It had never happened before. Everyone he'd broken had broken. Everyone he'd driven away had left. This kid was different, and behind that difference, Mr. G sensed something. A hand, an invisible but powerful hand. Who? Mr. G didn't know, but he was going to find out. Scar's voice shifts, heavier, closer. I need to stop right here, because there's something I need to tell you. While I was putting this story together, connecting all the pieces, at a certain point I noticed something very strange. Maromro's story, Elias's death, his meeting with Bob, all of it happened within an incredibly perfect timing, like it was planned. But who could have planned this? Maromro? No, he was just fulfilling a promise. Mr. G? No, he was on the other side. Then who? When I started asking this question, I noticed something else. Elias's last words. One day you'll find someone. Someone with eyes that look far away but are really looking inward. He said those words in 1957. Bob Marley was only 12 years old. Elias had never seen Bob, but what he described was exactly Bob. How was that possible? And now I'm going to tell you something about those two words. I'm still not going to say them, but I'm going to explain why I haven't said them. Because those two words weren't just for Bob. Those two words belong to everyone. When you hear those two words, and you will, I promise, you're going to see things in your own life. You're going to see your own breaking points. You're going to see your own Maromros. And maybe, just maybe, your own Eliases too. But for that, you need to be ready. And you're not ready yet. The next story will get you ready. Scar's voice reaches its calmest point. Port of Spain. A child was born. A musician died, and a promise was made. Kingston. A young man sat in the sand and heard himself for the very first time. And these 3 moments, thousands of miles apart, years between them, all happened. But they were all part of the same story. They all opened to the same door. And in front of that door, Mr. G was waiting. Still. But now he didn't just want to stop Bob, he wanted Maromro too. And that changed everything. See you in the next one. I'm Scar.